You're listening to Surviving Satchidananda, the podcast where we expose the dark side of Satchidananda Ashram Yogaville in Buckingham, Virginia, and the Global Integral Yoga Organization. My name is Brianna Patton. In the last episode, I spoke with Sharada Thompson. And in my first conversation with her, that wasn't recorded, that wasn't posted, she said to me, "Brianna, we've spoken a lot about how the women have been impacted by this organization, but I really think that you should talk to some of the men and get their perspective." And I said, "That's a great idea." So she introduced me to today's guest. His name is Vijay, and he started the Integral Yoga Institute in San Francisco. As a leader in the organization and as a man, he saw a completely different side of Swami Satchidananda that we're going to learn more about today. I hope you enjoy today's episode, and make sure you listen until the very end because there's a big surprise. You're listening to Surviving Satchidananda. Vijay, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your experience with integral yoga.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me a little bit about how you were introduced to integral yoga. How old were you? What was going on in your life when you were introduced to integral yoga?
So I was a young lad of probably about 20. I had just graduated college, and friends, college buddies, myself were very interested in the combination of spirituality and psychedelics. And at the time, we were very engrossed in things like Timothy Leary and light shows and Tibetan Book of the Dead. And we really took a lot of psychedelic trips together at that time. And at a certain point, I decided that I pretty much run the course in psychedelics and was interested in studying a spiritual discipline. And I started reading books on yoga. And as it happened, one of our friends had attended a talk by a teacher, and he was really excited about it. And he said, "You won't believe it. They've got this institute, and it's only a few blocks from where you guys live." So that was the beginning of my involvement in integral yoga.
This is in New York City?
This is in New York City, yes.
Okay. Do you remember the first time you met Swami Satchidananda?
Yes.
What was that like?
I actually met him over the phone
Oh,
because I called up for classes, and I was surprised that this man with a deep Indian voice picked up the phone and told me when the classes were going to start. And so that was my first introduction to him. And in my second introduction to him, I was taking a class and I was doing one of the backward bending poses, and I happened to come up in, I believe it must have been Cobra, and I was looking at his feet. So that was kind of the second introduction to him. And then, of course, gradually, we went to some talks that he gave on Friday nights, and, obviously had a much bigger involvement with him subsequently.
did you ever end up moving into the institute?
No, I did not. I did not live in the New York Institute. I lived close by. My ex-wife and I lived on Riverside Drive, which was a few blocks away, and I actually never moved into the Institute.
What did you like about the integral yoga community and Swami Satchidananda at that time?
At that time, it was a bunch of people, hippies, people who had a spiritual bent, and it was an eclectic, artistic, kind of freewheeling group of men and women, young men and women that really wanted to do something with their lives. And that was a prevailing energy that I felt at that time, is that the people wanted to do something with their lives. And, Swamiji, I think, was very focused in terms of how we could help in terms of teaching and running the institute and the other kinds of things that we could do.
Were you and others attracted to integral yoga and the action you all were taking because of, or partly because of civil rights or the war, or was that a factor in your enjoying it?
Certainly, that was a backdrop. civil rights, all during our college years, actually, our late high school years, right up into our college years, was definitely a factor. The war, of which most of my friends were called up and had to find alternative ways to get out of the draft, was also a feature of our lives. The relationship of spirituality and our spiritual evolution in the context to all of this, it's kind of an interesting question, Brianna, because I feel it's no different than what people are going through right now. There is so much torment and turbulence in our consensus reality now. And it's really about how we're able to use that foundational nature that is within all of us to bring ourselves in better balance and harmony with all of this insanity that is going on outside of us. So I think we're right back to where my experience started many years ago.
I like that you brought that up because, as you said, there's a lot of turbulence and social unrest and uncertainty going on now. And there's so many people not only searching for ways to cope with this and how to live, and also looking for something they can do to help. And a lot of these spaces like Integral Yoga and Yogaville are still around attracting people for the same reason. So definitely very relevant to today.
Absolutely.
When did you end up assuming a leadership role, and what was your role in the organization?
So after spending this period of time in New York, taking classes and then becoming teachers, and two of our friends decided that they wanted to set up a center in Los Angeles. And I immediately thought, boy, if I was ever going to set up a center, I'd set it up in San Francisco. San Francisco was really quite the center of counterculture in that time. So I was becoming increasingly dissatisfied with my career in industrial filmmaking. And I said to my ex-wife, hey, let's go pull up stakes and go to California and see if we can set up a yoga institute there. And that was the beginning of leadership positions that I had, because that initial yoga studio, which was really quite small in the beginning, gave forth to quite a number of people that were interested in integral yoga. And we established a much bigger community in San Francisco after that. And then I took a leadership position at that point.
So you were pretty much the start of the San Francisco Institute. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
pretty much. Yeah.
How did you all get the money for that building? Because I've heard that it was like people got their inheritances early or something. How did you get that amazing building?
Yeah. That amazing building, which is probably worth
Millions. It's like three
millions
blocks
of.
from Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, yeah. It's Zuckerberg has his one of his houses down the street from us. It's worth a few million at this point, and was sold for the amazing sum of about $62,000 back
Wow.
then. And so we really scraped together the down payment. And you're right, people ask their grandparents, okay, this is when you could give it to me. And so yeah, we were able to just scrape it by. And making the mortgage payments every month, that was kind of a tricky deal too, between the monies that we would make for yoga classes and just the contributions that people would give us, as well as the money that people paid who lived there, because we had probably over 20 people that were living there at that time. So, between all of that, we were able to get by and really able to continue to move forward in regards to more classes. And then we got to the place of retreats. And of course, all of this was due to the fact that Swami Satchidananda was a very big deal. And he was able to draw many people, not just in terms of his talks, but also the retreats that we were able to organize and the donations that came in as a result of his energy. So that was an important piece.
What was your relationship like with Swami Satchidananda up until this point when you're starting the center?
Before I started the center, I did a number of things for him, special projects that he would ask me to do, for better or for worse. I think one of the projects that I did for him was that he knew that I was in the film industry. And so he had a roll of film and he wanted contact sheets made of the film. And so oh yeah, Swami, I can do that, no problem. I felt really kind of very proud, I could do that job for him. And I went to one of the labs that my company used and turned out at the time it was like a couple $100. And then when I got it, it was like, oh my God, I didn't realize. Because usually when we did that kind of work as a company, I never saw the bill. So I came back and I said, like, oh my God, how am I going to tell him this? And I told him this. I never saw his face drop so much. If there could have been a hole, I would have crawled into it. It's like, I'm so sorry. And I apologized. I felt just so embarrassed. And we didn't have a lot of money at that time. And so this was a big deal. And then it must have been a day or two later. I was taking classes and he called me in and he said, you know what, Vijay, that happened. And then very shortly after, somebody came and gave a donation that immediately covered that. Do you see how things work?
That's not the first story I heard when there was a big bill that was coming up, and then miraculously, that day or the next day, someone would come in and bring the exact amount of money. Did you feel like that was like a spiritual experience at that time? Because I like when I've heard these stories before, I was like, oh, that's so magical and amazing that this was able to happen. But now I'm like, did he just maybe, work his charm and get the money from someone he knew had it?
You know, I think he had many what we would call powers. And I think one of the powers that he had was the power to attract. And we now know that the law of attraction. And I think he had that particular ability. He could attract people to him, he could attract money to him. I think he was really able to pull that energy towards him. So I don't think he was particularly surprised that that happened. I think he had seen that kind of thing happen before. Did he do it consciously, if that's your question? That I don't know. That's a kind of above my pay grade kind of question.
What other powers did you observe that he had?
Well, for me, and this is probably his the greatest power or the power that subsumes all of the others, is he had an enormous resonance. His presence, his resonance was extraordinary and could be something that in your day-to-day interactions kind of not really experience directly, and yet at other times you would feel its power. His presence could fill up just a single room of people having dinner, or it could be as large as filling up a whole huge church. His resonance, I believe, is still contained at the ashram and at the institute. I've been to schools and other institutes in India, and I felt that presence there as well. It wasn't just when he was in his body. I also think that that resonance has also been left in other places as well.
In my conversations with people who knew Swami Satchidananda personally, I've noticed that a lot of them had something in their life that they felt was missing, like a father figure or some sort of need that they had that Swami Satchidananda filled. Did that happen for you as well? Was there something that you were receiving from Swami Satchidananda that you felt was missing?
certainly for me, I know Shard has told her story, and there were some elements in her story in terms of what she didn't get from her family, also resonated to some degree with me as well. I was, when I met Swamiji, a young man who really had never understood a sense of purpose. And the way in which Swamiji took me under his wing was both loving, but also very fatherly in a masculine, energetic way. He could be very direct and at times even painfully so. But it always felt that it was being done for my evolution, my character. I do think that this thing about character development is a less discussed element of his interaction. And it's actually, as I've looked into this lately, actually an important feature of the Gurukula system that guru disciple relations come out of, which is this work on character. And I think that that was a very important element in the beginning. I mean, we were a bunch of drug taking hippies, and so he did a lot of direct work on who we were as people, as humans, as individuals who, you say you want to lead a spiritual life, but are you being and acting in that way? So that was, I experienced that in the beginning.
How did you feel like your character developed throughout those early times?
I certainly became a far more functional person. I certainly became far more responsible in terms of taking care of people. All of a sudden I had this organization under me, 20 to 50 people that, followed my direction. I set up retreats. I, bought property. This was all stuff that I had, not done up to that point in my life. On the personal level, I would say, looking back, that I did not have a real understanding as to who I was interpersonally. I had a lot of patterns that would have to be refined much later on in my life. I was still, in many ways, kind of immature emotionally. And so that piece never got touched. It was more about you're a functionary, this is how you serve the guru, this is what I want you to do. So that piece all got dropped out and didn't ever really get touched on until much further on in my life, and not necessarily through yoga or through Swamiji.
What did those conversations look like where you're getting this leadership role at the San Francisco Institute? Did you come to Swami Satchidananda and say, I'd like to do this in San Francisco, or did he just pick you and say, you're going to run this center?
I volunteered to do it. So it wasn't he picked me and said, "Oh, I'm going to send you out there." He didn't do that in my case. Others he did that with subsequently, for sure. But me, I was kind of, no, I did that and I chose that. The conversations between him and I at that point were, how do I set up a yoga center? What do I charge for classes? People are giving me bananas. Is that really is that the kind of payment that I should be taking? They say that's all that I can afford. What am I supposed to do? So, he really helped me on the nuts and bolts of setting up a yoga institute. We had 20 plus people living in a house. How are we gonna deal with, people paying for their rent, and how are we gonna manage the interactions between the men and the women? All of this. What were our expectations? Did we expect everybody to get up every morning and do meditation and hatha? It's like, what were our expectations? So I was totally reliant on him.
Do you remember how much you were charging for classes back then?
You will be shocked. We charged $1 a class.
Wow.
And it was a big deal for some people. They were really some of these dyed in the wool hippies. They had a problem with $1 for the class.
I'm curious how you fit 20 people in this building and we're doing yoga classes. Where were people sleeping? Because I lived there. I lived in like a closet in the basement, basically. There was room for a twin bed and a shelf. And then I think there was like 7 people living there when I lived there. And that felt like, because we had 2 rooms that were for yoga and then people slept in the other one. So what was the sleeping arrangement like?
So first of all, my ex-wife and I, we had deluxe accommodations. We slept in this little alcove by the kitchen. That little place that faces the garden. So we had a loft bed that was up where the door is that leads into the so-called dining room. And so we had a loft bed there. But upstairs, where they've made that into one large room, that was 2 rooms. There was a wall divider in there, and so people slept on bedrolls. So I think it was like maybe 5 or 6 guys in one room and 4 women in another, and the bathrooms were a problem. That was a major problem, and we like to talk about how we had to accommodate the different shifts of people going into the bathrooms because we had only 2 full bathrooms in the place.
When was the first time that you realized that Swami Satchidananda may have been having inappropriate relationships with some of his disciples?
So this is 1970. We had set up already Yogaville West, and I was called for a meeting by my colleagues who were running the New York Center. And came back. I had no idea kind of what was going on until I got there and then told that there was this allegation of sex with Swamiji by one of his secretaries. And that at that meeting, that's when Sylvia Shapiro revealed that she had been propositioned for sex by Swamiji.
What else happened at that meeting? Who all was there and how was it discussed?
Well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this meeting obviously is kind of part of the lawsuit that has been brought against the Institute. And I've actually given deposition in regards to this. So all that I will say is that it was a meeting attended by, as I say, by my colleagues, myself. It's over 50 years ago, so I may not have remembered all of the details of it, but I'll never forget how emotional this meeting was.
What were you thinking and feeling after that meeting?
I have said this, and I don't think this is any secret. I knew that Swamiji was not telling the truth at that time. And that was devastating to me. And as I've said on other occasions, I went back home. My parents were living in Queens at that time, and I came back and told my mother saw immediately that something had happened. And, she asked me, and I told her, and she looked at me like, "You mean you never thought that that was the case?" And I said, "No, he's a monk." My mother said to me, just look at that man. He's gorgeous. What were you thinking? Of course.
Did you continue to stay after that meeting even though you realized he wasn't telling the truth?
Yes.
And how
I
did things change for you after deciding to stay and having these 2 conflicting ideas, knowing he's lying and then also wanting to be faithful and develop yourself spiritually?
What happened inside of me was what I think has happened inside of many people, which is they could hold 2 things at the same time. One, they could hold that their teacher was lying, and the other, they could hold that what they were doing was very fulfilling for them, and the relationship that they had with him was very important to them. So I could hold those two pieces together, knowing that what I was doing in terms of, setting up the Yogaville West and, having set up the San Francisco and also involved in Los Angeles was very important. And I probably would have stayed on for many years afterwards, except for one thing. And that one thing was that my ex-wife at the time said simply, I cannot live this life any longer. We now have a child. You have to decide what you want to do. And so that was a very hard decision for me. And I don't think Swamiji made it any easier for me. He really wanted me to stay and really would have done practically anything for me to stay. He had bent all rules for me previously because of what my ex-wife was asking for. He understood that we had to make her happy, or else, she was going to make my life very unhappy. So I think he knew that as a reality. But I couldn't stay. I realized that it was time for me to find other ways for me to support my family and for me to continue on. So that's what happened. But to answer your question, which I think really is fundamental, that contradiction, that conflict lived on within me for many, many years. And I wasn't really able to come to grips with that until much later. I loved the man, but it was hard for me to understand ethically how this impacted me personally. And I really operated for many years afterwards from a ethically dubious space. And I have looked at this for quite some time and realized that at that point, I really needed to examine myself more closely in regards to having stayed and having kept quiet.
What do you mean by ethically dubious? What did that look like?
Ethically dubious is not telling the truth, not being honest, not saying what you know to be true.
One of the lifestyle principles that integral yogis are expected to follow is celibacy. So while you're still living there, how did you reconcile that you and others were expected to keep this vow while the teacher was not?
My experience with my sexuality, let's put it this way, my involvement with yoga caused a lot of confusion within me around my sexuality while I was living there, and it did afterwards as well. I was not celibate, didn't have to be celibate as a married person, but I also was not faithful to my wife. So that was really an issue for me that I felt, well, the guru took care of his needs, I'm taking care of my needs. And I did not look at this behavior from a position of who I was as a person, who I wanted to be as a person, what my character was. So that took me a long time before I really was able to kind of address that.
Would you say that Swami Satchidananda was manipulative?
Oh, yeah.
How did he manipulate people? What kind of tactics did he use?
Uh, he could be overtly manipulative and own it, or he could be subtly manipulative and not own it. But when he wanted something, he could dangle stuff in front of you. He mostly knew that people loved him, that people deeply loved him. And he knew how to use that.
When you say he would own it, so he would manipulate someone to get something out of them and then he would say afterwards, look what I did? Is that what happened?
He could do something like that. He would often say, I'm using psychology here.
Wow. Wow. Did you ever feel exploited while you were there or after the fact?
That's an interesting question, Brianna, because I do think the question is what you got from what was gotten from you. All right. I always felt that what I got was a real awareness of what a spiritual life was. He opened up this part of me that I wanted to have opened and said, you are a spiritual being. This is the way to live a spiritual life. It's not the only way, but it is a way. And so when I look at the balance sheet of what was taken from me and some of the things as we're just talking about, they weren't good. They weren't great for my emotional maturity. They weren't great for my development psychologically. On balance, I think, okay, yep, I was harmed, but I also got a lot. I can't say that for everybody, though. And I certainly would never say that for the women. But I also want to say something else about that.
Yes.
It took me many years to come to the place of understanding the impact of what was harmful. And it took a lot of work to do that. A lot of people are not there. And I feel we have to appreciate the fact that that's their path, and all of our paths are not the same.
The conversation about Swami Satchidananda's inappropriate relationships with his students was reignited in 2022 on social media. There was a lot of conversations happening on Facebook, people who supported women who came forward and those who denied it. How did you get involved in this conversation? What was that like for you revisiting that after so many years?
So there was a long period of time in which I lost contact with my sangha, with the people that I spiritually grew up with through the organization in the 90s. And I came back into the organization back in the early 2000s. And I started to go back to Virginia on a regular basis around Guru Purnima Day. And I reconnected with Shanti, who we were always very close. And I would stay with Shanti and we'd stay up half the night and just talk. And going to one of the Guru Purnimas, I said to her, I'm not feeling that great about all of this devotional stuff to him. I said, in light of what you and I know, I said it like that. And she said, yeah, I know. Now, this was well before Shanti ever revealed her story. And so that is what started both of us writing to the board and saying, you guys need to deal with this. This is something that can blow up at any moment and have a lot of implications for you. I mean, Shanti wrote some beautiful, extraordinarily insightful and cogent arguments for this. And the response was, nope, we're not going to do anything. And then, I had subsequent conversations with some of the board members who I know personally. And the thing was, no, we're not going to touch this. And so through this whole process and through the Zoom meetings that happened, I became increasingly more vocal about what I knew and my need to really start to express my truth in regards to this.
When did you start sending letters and communicating to the board about this?
I think it was just before the pandemic. So like 2019 is my sense about maybe 2020.
What were the repercussions of you supporting these women? How did the community respond to you?
Initially, not very well. They didn't want to talk about it. And then subsequently, I have not heard from my friends. in several years now. Nobody seems to want to just have a conversation. People want to come prepared with their talking points. And I will always be open to having a conversation about this. I'm willing to hear their side if they're willing to hear me.
Well, I hope you're able to reconnect with your friends one day and have that conversation. I think that could be healing for a lot of people. We know that yoga is not just about physical postures, it's a lifestyle and it's a philosophy that's grounded in truth and nonviolence. Do you think that the Integral Yoga organization is living up to these principles today? Are they acting ethically?
One of the things here is who the organization is, right? Let's kind of take a step back and say, who is the organization? The formal organization, the Satchidananda Ashram slash Yogaville, that particular property in Virginia, that is the organization. The New York Integral Yoga Institute, the San Francisco Integral Yoga Institute, that is the organization. I would say to you that just those entities, there is quite a lot of conflict here. Not everybody sees it the same way. Now, because that there's been this mandate driven by the lawyer to control communication, there isn't open dialogue. Let's talk about the community that surrounds the ashram. That is a very different deal. That community is not largely aligned with the positions that the organization has taken around this. There are some members of that community who are aligned with the organization, but by and large, from my understanding, most of them are not. This is a community that has been set up around the ashram. Some of them may work this, many do not, and they have really set themselves up now as independent from the ashram itself.
Yeah, I remember when I lived there, and this was before any of this came forward. There was at that time even a lot of tension between younger community members who wanted to kind of push the organization forward, and that was always shut down by certain people who were in charge. And I think that tension has just increased over the years, especially after all of this has come to light. And something I realized when I was living at Yogaville, things seemed so crazy there and weird at times, but it felt like Yogaville was just a microcosm of the larger world. Like, we can talk about America, like there's a lot of great people here, my family's here, my friends are here, but then we have this government that's going crazy. So it's very similar.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
There's a lot of good
Um,
people at Yogaville, I guess is what I'm trying to
that's
say.
right. There's a lot of good people at Yogaville. There's a lot of good people in that community. Let me put it this way. All of the principals who I know for many, many years, all of the board of trustees, I know most of them personally for many, many years. They are good people. They're not bad people. I think it's been my experience in terms of having discussions with them. They're very much locked into a certain reality.
What do you think the future holds for integral yoga?
I'm so glad you asked me that question because you're the future of integral yoga. People like you are the future of integral yoga. And this is a very difficult time. This is a time of transition. If integral yoga is going to move to the next level, it requires your energy and the energy of people like you to move it onto the next level. I think the ashram has tremendous potential.
So, at the beginning of this episode, I promised you a surprise, and here it is. When I first heard this, my jaw hit the floor. Sharda and Vijay, over 50 years after leaving the organization, randomly met up and eventually got married. And the story about how they reconnected is pretty remarkable. I asked the two of them to come together and tell us the whole story. Okay, so you two are married now. Did you know each other in the 70s or the 60s when you were in integral yoga?
we met in the summer of 1970, and I was running the retreat center in Northern California, and I got a call from Swamiji, and he said, there's a young woman here in New York. I want to send her out to California for the summer. Please look after her. She's young and she's kind of vulnerable. And so I said, okay. And I went down to San Francisco and met her at the San Francisco Institute, picked her up and drove her up to Lake County where our retreat center was. And the entire way, I don't think she said more than 5 words to me. She spent pretty much the bulk of the summer with us. And that was the last time I saw her until I met her on a coffee date 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
3 years ago. 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Yeah, we just celebrated our third anniversary just this month in terms of meeting together. So yeah.
So Sharda, you didn't talk much on the car ride, but did you interact at all after you were settling in?
With
Yes.
Vijay as little as possible.
Were you avoiding him or something?
No, I was very shy, and
Very shy.
men were quite scary to me. And I had a couple of friends that I made there, but not a lot. I was in my own world a lot of the time.
And this is when you said Swami Satchidananda sent you there because he was trying to shield you from what was going on in New York, the scandal that was unfolding there. Is that what happened?
That's my recollection. Yeah. Hmm.
And then, so how did you meet? Was it like 50 years later?
Us
Yeah, how did you meet?
on a
Where?
blind date.
We both were we were on a dating app.
Yeah, a dating app. That's like a blind date. We had no idea we'd ever met before, and we sat down to have a coffee, and we had one of those conversations you have on a coffee date. You know, where are you from? He said New York, and I said, oh, I'm from New York too. When did you come out here? What'd you do in New York? And it turned out we had both been involved with a yoga community. Then it turned out it was the same yoga community. Then he said to me, maybe I was your yoga teacher. And I said, maybe I was your yoga teacher. And at some point I asked him, what was your name when we were in that community? And when he told me, I said, oh, I knew somebody by that name. And he said, that was me. And then we just sat and stared at each other for an hour, at least an hour. We were completely stunned. We hadn't recognized each other. We had no intuition about it. But I think what we both felt immediately was that here was somebody to talk to who really understood, for me, a very short but very significant part of my coming of age in a way that I'd never had anybody to talk to, because my cutoff from the community had been so abrupt and so complete. It was life-changing.
And Vijay, what's going through your head when you have this realization?
It was hard for me to put the woman that was in front of me on the date with that young girl that I had picked up.
A very traumatized girl.
I mean, I was like, I mean, Charlotte is a very well-spoken, intelligent, articulate, knowledgeable person. That person I hardly knew them, even though they stayed at Yogaville for several weeks. I was kind of like, we passed and there was hardly any conversation. Actually, Shard has told me, subsequently, and oh yeah, I connected with this one. I had no idea that she was connecting with anybody.
I felt much more comfortable with his at the time wife than I did with him.
Right.
And you both said in both of our conversations that everything that happened after you left has been difficult to deal with. Has you two reconnecting helped you process this or heal at all?
Well, I think that that's kind of one of the more interesting pieces of us reconnecting is that, as I told you, Brianna, that before I reconnected with Sharda, I had been talking with Shanti about all of this and had written letters, and Sharda knew nothing about this. And when I began to tell her what was going on, then she revealed to me what had happened to her. And I was like, oh my God. And then, of course, I facilitated her getting connected with Shanti and Susan. And so that's been a significant development for all, I suspect, for all three of the women.
What do you think, Sharda? How is reconnecting you and Vijay, how has that helped you process or heal this time in your life?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that, like, I have become a person who speaks up. And so I can see who I was. I know I was in a difficult situation when I left, between whether to talk about what had happened to me, which felt like it would be destructive to the community, or just to disappear in a way that would be a great rupture for me in my life. I can see how difficult that was. But I also see that I just wasn't a person who spoke up for herself. And so when Vijay said to me that this was happening and that Shanti was getting very little support, I said, oh, I'll talk about it. And I really believed initially that if I did, I think I wrote this in the thing you read, Brianna, that I thought everybody would just go, oh, okay, now we get it. This really happened. And it would all be over. I never really thought that people wouldn't believe me or that it wouldn't matter or anything like that. So I mean, that really surprised me because the community I've been in early on seemed to me like one where people cared about each other.
What do you love about each other?
Oh God, where do I start?
Well, no public displays. It's so private. It's such a private question.
Shard is like the deepest, most sensitive, most intelligent, loving person I've ever met. I found somebody who is my match on so many levels, but not just a match, but a challenge on so many levels. I've grown in the 3 years that I've known her, I've grown immensely on multiple levels, intellectually, spiritually, culturally, physically. Yeah. So, what's so amazing about finding somebody at our age is that we know that we don't have an awful lot of time together. And so we put a lot of emphasis on our connection. We don't let stuff hang out for too long without addressing it. So I love that about Sharda is that she's right there with me in finding ways to reconnect and her commitment to our relationship.
Yeah, I'm not as good at this kind of talk in a public forum as he is, but I think that Vijay is a very rare man who is not afraid of his emotions, who's not afraid to be vulnerable, who has beautiful values in his life and tries to live them, and who is still growing at 81. The year I met him, he had gone back to school, was going to a university program in Canada to get a certificate as a psychedelic therapist. Not a lot of 81-year-olds go back to school to do something like that when they don't need to, when they already have an established career. But he always wants to stretch. He always wants to grow, to expand who he is. And that is, to me, a beautiful and admirable quality. And he's a great man. I don't think we've ever had a conversation about domestic roles or anything like that. I mean, it's never even come up. That's very different from relationships I've been in with other men where there's constantly who's doing what and all, whose job is it? It's never happened between us. He just shows up 100% every day.
So does she.
And Brianna, we work together in a very unusual way. We're therapists. We do couples therapy as a unit. We do couples therapy together. And I see one of the people in the relationship and he sees the other one. And then we argue about them a lot. And then we all get together in a room. The other day, I was reminded of that. There's an old Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy movie, Adam's Rib, where they're lawyers and they're constantly bickering at home about their cases. And we can get quite impassioned about it. But then we come together and it's the most amazing synergy between us, where we are so much more than just the sum of two people working with a couple. And we love it.
That's beautiful. I will say, since the people listening to this can't see you, you both look amazing for your age. When you said 81, I was like, I couldn't believe it. You look like you're in your 60s. It must be all the yoga, and I think also that mentality, that like always wanting to grow. I feel like when people get kind of stagnant, it shows up in their face and their body, but you both look so young and radiant.
Well, thank you for saying
Thank
that. And it points, it really points out another thing we have in common, which is that we really challenge a lot of the beliefs that people have about what it means to be an older person, the beliefs that seem really prevalent in our culture. And I think we both believe that a lot of the illness and dysfunction that we see among people our age is to do with old emotional pain, old grievances that are unresolved, an inability to forgive themselves or other people for things from the past, and how important it is to let go of that kind of thing through healing it, not through pretending it didn't happen, but through really getting down and into it and through the other side. And the proof is what you see in the way people's bodies look as they get older. Very often they're just literally bowed over with emotional pain.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories with me. And this is such a beautiful ending to this, what could have been something that's unresolved. It's just inspiring to see you two come together and continue to grow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, really. We really appreciate the opportunity, and we appreciate what you're doing in shedding light on this. And we really hope that others in this circumstance that you've been delving into will be healed by this, because I think that's the most important thing about this work, is that people realize that there are others, and people realize that there's the possibility of healing.